Hi, folks. This is Dr. Eric Fields. I am a psychologist specializing in gambling addiction. Today, I want to talk more about one of the so-called hallmarks of gambling addiction or compulsive gambling, and that is chasing. There are actually three types of chasing behavior when it comes to compulsive gambling. And I want to talk about each one. These kinds of behaviors is really what leads to such reckless gambling behavior and to the accrual of a great amount of debt for people afflicted with this condition. So, the first chasing behavior is chasing that initial high. So, during an episode of gambling, a compulsive gambler, when they first start placing those bets, before they find out whether or not they won, it is very, very exciting for them. Just that anticipation. In fact, a lot of the people that I have worked with tell me that the greatest high is right before they click that button to place the bet. That anticipation is such a high for them. Now, if they win the bet, then that is another kind of special high. But it's all downhill from there. It's very interesting, but the high that they get, maybe winning that first $200 bet, is much greater than the high they get maybe several hours later, placing $1,000 bet and winning that. Why? Because it's that initial anticipation and that initial dopamine hit. Now, this kind of chasing is actually not so dissimilar from, let's say, other kinds of addictions, right? For example, the person with alcohol use disorder, that first drink that they order, the anticipation of getting it, and the anticipation of opening that can or bottle of beer and first tasting that alcohol really is exciting. It's this anticipatory effect that is so alluring to the person with an addiction. And I think what's even more similar to this initial kind of chasing that happens with people with compulsive gamblers who, through the rest of the night, are trying to chase that initial feeling of excitement right before they place that first bet, or with that first bet that they won. Some other addiction that's very similar, I think, to that experience is cocaine use disorder. And I've made comparisons to cocaine use disorder in the past, having that same similar stimulant quality to it, right? That when somebody does that first hit or bump of coke, that's the highest that they're going to get for the rest of the night. And so that for the rest of the night, they are just chasing that high. So that chasing phase is not so dissimilar from other types of addictions. What is very different is the money chasing, right? So that kind of chasing is an emotional chasing. And then we have the money chasing. So on a given night, when they're actually losing, of course, this doesn't hold true for a night that they've been very lucky and they're doing very well. But for a night where they've been really losing, right, a lot of money, they're down a bunch, and they could have been up a lot at the beginning of the night, but now they're down quite a bit. They've not only lost whatever they won maybe that night, but they've also lost the money that they have put into this gambling endeavor. And so they many, many times will lose an exponential amount of money because they're trying to get that money back. And it can be so irrational. So if you're down several $100s to keep risking it, right? And we talked about this idea of loss aversion that is really so strong with compulsive gamblers. To be down several $100s, whereas most rational people would say, that's enough, I don't want to lose any more, the compulsive gambler will chase and chase and chase till they're down thousands of dollars that night. Okay? And we talked about social gamblers also doing a little chasing in the context of a given night, but it's nowheres in comparison to the degree of a compulsive gambler. You might be down a couple $100s as a social gambler and saying, let me try $50 more to get some of it back. Let me try another 50. That's it, 300 down, I'm out. Compulsive gamblers, they can chase that money not only on that night, but the next night, the next night, the next night, so that at the end of the week, they could be down $10,000. How irrational, right? $10,000 to try to get back several hundred. So now let's talk about the phase of chasing or a period of chasing behavior that is very, very, very unique to compulsive gamblers, where social gamblers just will not do this. One of the reasons why social gamblers won't do this is because they won't be in this kind of situation that I'm going to describe. And the situation is that the lifetime gambling behavior of a compulsive gambler has resulted in lifetime losses. In other words, they are in the red for their lifetime of gambling behavior. And this amount is usually very, very significant. A social gambler might be in the red several $100s or even $1,000, which might sound like a lot, but over the course of their lifetime is really not. And then, of course, it's all in relation to their income, right? If you're making $20,000 a year and you lose $1,000 in a year, that can be quite significant. Not as significant as somebody who's making $200,000 a year, right? But when we're talking about compulsive gamblers, I don't think there's any splitting hairs on this issue, right? The amount of debt anybody would think is very significant, right? We're talking about $50,000 in debt over the course of their lifetime, $100,000, even more. Sometimes losing their home that could be worth $300,000 to $400,000. Their losses are very, very significant. And these losses are very problematic for the compulsive gambler because not only are they an issue just in terms of the amount of money that they have lost over the course of their life, but this becomes a trigger for them so that every time they gamble, this number is in the back of their mind. They're always thinking about the totality of their losses, whether consciously or unconsciously, it's always playing in the back of their mind. And they're not very good at letting you know exactly how much the amount is because on some level, they want to be in denial because if they face the number, the exact number, a lot of them don't think they'd be able to handle what it actually is. But most of them are pretty good at estimating at least what the number is, right? So that if their actual losses over their lifetime is 70,000, they might estimate that it's $50,000. So they still are aware that it's quite a large sum of money. And this plays in the back of their mind every time they gamble. And when they're not gambling, this a lot of times leads to them gambling because they want to eventually make this money back. Now, here's the interesting thing. I've worked with tons of people with gambling addiction. And guess what? A good number of the people I've worked with actually do at some point in time make that money back. It's incredible. They actually sometimes do get lucky enough to make that money back. And do you know what happens? Out of all the times that they've told me, if only I could make that money back, I am out of this game, it doesn't happen. In fact, I can't remember a single time when it's ever happened. I'm not saying it's impossible because I can't predict for any one person what's possible for them and what's not, but I can only talk about my experience. And my experience has been that each and every time that someone has won back their lifetime losses, so to speak, they have lost it all again. This loss is so triggering. And so, as a harm reduction proponent, somebody who believes in the value of reducing any kind of addictive behavior to any degree, whether it be frequency, intensity, or duration, right? And in relation to people with gambling issues, reducing the amount of money that they're losing because we're trying to reduce the amount of money that they wager. The less money you wager, the losses are going to tend to be less, right? And that means less triggering in terms of how long that casing phase is going to last that night, if we're talking about that kind of casing, and how long the casing phase is going to last, and how triggering those losses are going to be in the long term. So for harm reduction, our whole goal is to reduce the amount of money that they're wagering, of course, trying to reduce the frequency in terms of how often they gamble and how long they do it for. Again, all coming back to this central idea of minimizing the harm, not accruing so much debt, accruing less debt than you normally would if left to your own devices, right? Without any kind of therapeutic support and help. Because this is such an issue for them. Because at the end of the day, somebody with $100,000 of losses because of their gambling behavior versus someone with $20,000, the person with $20,000 of losses, and let's hold constant their salary and income levels, right? That person is going to have a much better shot of eventually abstaining and walking away from this. Why? Because it's easy to walk away from $20,000 worth of losses than it is $100,000 worth of losses. The bigger your debt, the harder it is to walk away from this addiction and behavior. This is Dr. Fields. I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you did. I'll have more to say about this at another time. My last words, don't case. Casing sucks.